All right, for this explainer, we're diving into the text, the biogenesis of the first sanctuary. The entire story it lays out can really be seen as a kind of controlled experiment, one set up to solve a very specific and very dangerous problem. So right off the bat, the source material sets up this central conflict. It boils down to this. There's a fundamental incompatibility between humanity's natural state and God. It's a clash that the text points out can actually be fatal for the human. This is the core problem that everything else is trying to solve. So you have to ask, what's causing this incompatibility? Well, the text points to something specific it calls instrumentally convergent behavior. Basically, it's this built-in drive for personal gain and to multiply. This particular cognitive state is presented as the main barrier preventing any kind of direct, open interaction with God. So how do you solve a problem like that? You create a specific environment. The narrative is set during the last glacial period, right in Earth's equatorial regions. The conditions there were just right for what the source calls a natural sanctuary. You can almost think of this place as the laboratory for the whole experiment. And this really gets to the heart of why the sanctuary was even needed. The whole point was to create this special, controlled space, a place where the creator and the created could interact safely without those fatal risks we just talked about. Okay, so you've got the lab. Now, who do you put inside? The text describes the creation of the first man and a whole collection of animals, all of them specifically designed for this unique environment. Yeah, these are not your everyday creatures. And what's so fascinating is just how different these residents were. For starters, they were created without that drive for personal gain. They also didn't have the compulsion to multiply. On top of that, the source notes they were literally built to live for a very, very long time, maybe through something like enhanced telomere action, all to make sure this venture could last. Now, inside this sanctuary, the text brings in two other really important elements, a couple of unique trees. And these are huge variables in this whole setup. Let's break these two down. On one hand, you've got the tree of life. Its job was to act as a supplement, a catalyst for basically indefinite life extension. And importantly, it was accessible. On the other hand, you have the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Totally different purpose here. It was designed to switch back on the cognitive abilities that have been suppressed in these special humans. But as you can see, access was strictly denied. And this brings up a really good question, one the source itself actually raises. If they weren't supposed to eat from it, why even put the tree there in the first place? Well, the text plays out a couple of possibilities. The first idea is that maybe, just maybe, the fruit would be offered later on, once the man had shown he had enough self-control. The other possibility, it might have been intended as a sort of parting gift if the humans ever decided to leave the sanctuary. Okay, so the stage is set. But then the narrative takes a turn with the introduction of a companion and a really pivotal choice that comes right after. So, to give the man a companion, the source describes this process where a woman is, distilled is the word it uses, from the man's DNA and stem cell-rich rib. The text even suggests this method was used to make sure their personalities would be compatible. And now we get to a critical turning point. A discussion gets started between the woman and an animal resident that the text describes as malevolent. This conversation, which is all about God's instructions, leads directly to the premature consumption of the fruit from that forbidden tree of knowledge. And just like that, everything changes. This one act creates a whole new reality, with some pretty major consequences. You could say the experiment's conditions are now permanently altered. So let's walk through what happened right after. It's a chain reaction, really. First, their anxieties and urges just become uncontrollable. Then, that original problem comes roaring back. Getting close to God is now a fatal risk again. Third, it becomes clear they can't really handle all this new knowledge they've suddenly acquired. And finally, and this is a big one, access to that tree of life, it's now off limits, for good. This new reality means they can't stay where they are. The story now follows the pair as they have to leave the sanctuary and go out into the wider world. The experiment, in a way, is moving into a new phase. So now armed with these new expanded mental capacities, which included sexual intent, the pair starts their new life out among the rest of humanity. And then the source points to a really significant event that happens with their children. Their firstborn son commits the premeditated murder of his younger brother. And what's wild is that this happened even after he had received direct counseling from God. And here's one last really interesting detail from the text. Even though they were cut off from the tree of life,
The first man and several of his descendants were novocentenarians. What does that mean? It means they lived to be over 900 years old. Incredible.
And all of this brings us to the conclusion that's presented in the source material. These events, especially that murder, are presented as reinforcing a central conclusion that humanity is just not capable of sustained righteousness when you give them the capacity to know both good and evil. And the text really just leaves us there to consider the weight of that observation.